In the heart of a quiet town nestled between rolling hills, there was a shelter, a modest building that stood as a sanctuary for those who had given their all for their country. The veterans' shelter wasn't much to look at, but for the men and women who found themselves there, it was everything. It was a place to rest, to heal, to find some semblance of peace after the chaos of war. But, like any refuge, it carried a heaviness, an unspoken understanding of the battles fought both on the field and in their minds. Alice, the nurse who ran the medical wing of the shelter, had worked there for nearly a decade. She was no soldier, but she might as well have been. Her life was dedicated to caring for these veterans, and she had seen the toll war had taken on them both physically and emotionally. Every day was a reminder of the cost of service, but Alice had never shied away from it. She saw their pain, their scars, but she also saw their strength, their resilience. She'd become something of a mother figure to many of the veterans, the one they trusted, the one who could soothe their nightmares and calm their anxieties. Her father, a former Marine, had been one of them, and in a way, she considered it her mission to continue his legacy, ensuring that no one ever felt abandoned or forgotten. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, a group of bikers rolled into town. They weren't the typical visitors the small town was used to. With leather jackets, skull tattoos, and an air of danger, they had a reputation that made even the most hardened locals steer clear. The group was loud, their bikes roaring like thunder as they made their way down the main street. Alice had seen them coming. She had seen many like them rough around the edges, brimming with an energy that didn't quite fit the quiet peace of the shelter. But Alice wasn't worried. Not for herself, at least. The veterans inside, however, were a different story. They had seen too many battles, fought too many wars, and many of them struggled with their inner demons. It only took one wrong move, one careless comment, to stir up a storm that could undo the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. The bikers swaggered into the shelter, their boots thudding against the floor as they made their way to the common room. Alice, standing behind the counter in the nurse's office, watched them carefully. She knew what they were after. They didn't belong here. The shelter wasn't some dive bar or pool hall. It was a place of refuge. But they didn't seem to care. They were here to make noise, to prove something to themselves, or to whoever they were trying to impress. One of the bikers, a tall man with a thick beard and tattoos running up his arms, stepped forward. He looked around with a smirk, his eyes landing on Alice as he made his way to the counter. Well, he said in a voice thick with arrogance. This is a nice little setup you've got here. Wonder what kind of people come to a place like this. Alice didn't flinch. She had dealt with much worse in her life. Her father had taught her the importance of holding your ground, especially when it mattered. She kept her eyes on him, her expression calm but unwavering. You wouldn't understand, she replied, her voice cool but firm. These men and women here have earned their peace. They fought for this country, gave up everything for it. What about you? What have you given up? The biker smirked, taking a step closer. Oh, I've given plenty, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Just not in a place like this. These old guys are probably living off the government's dime, right? What's so special about them? Alice's eyes narrowed. The insult was clear, and she knew the veterans could hear it too. She could feel the tension in the room rise, the veterans shifting in their chairs, some of them staring with a mixture of anger and hurt. Alice took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. These old guys, as you call them, she said, her tone unwavering, have seen things you can't even imagine. They've been through hell and back. They've bled for this country, fought in wars you only read about in history books. And they don't deserve to be mocked." The biker laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed through the room. He took another step forward, now standing right in front of Alice. "And what are you gonna do about it?" he sneered. "You think you can stop me?" Alice didn't back down. She wasn't just some nurse. She was a protector, a guardian of the people who had served their country, and she would fight to the bitter end for them. She stepped closer, meeting the biker's gaze without hesitation. "You may think you're tough," she said quietly, "but you're messing with the wrong people." At that moment, one of the veterans, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, slowly stood from his wheelchair. His movements were slow and deliberate, his cane tapping softly on the floor as he made his way toward the biker. The biker looked at him with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "What's this old man gonna do?" he muttered, but the room had fallen silent. The veterans were watching, waiting, and Alice knew that the weight of their collective presence was more powerful than any physical confrontation. Mr. Thompson reached the biker and, without saying a word, placed his hand on the man's shoulder. It wasn't a threat, it was a gesture of calm, of authority. The biker, who had been so full of bravado moments before, seemed to shrink under the weight of it. He glanced around the room, and for the first time, he seemed to realize that he wasn't dealing with a group of helpless old men. He was dealing with people who had lived through more than he could ever comprehend. For a moment, everything was still. And then, without another word, the biker turned and walked out, his friends following behind him, leaving the shelter in peace. Alice stood there for a moment, watching the door close behind them. She knew it wasn't just about one confrontation. It was a reminder that strength didn't always come from physical power. Sometimes, it came from the quiet resilience of those who had survived the worst. In that moment, Alice wasn't just a nurse, she was a protector, and she had reminded everyone in that room, including the biker, of the power of respect, dignity, and the unbreakable spirit of those who had fought for their country. And the veterans? They sat back, their expressions softening, knowing that they weren't forgotten. That, no matter how the world changed, there would always be someone to stand up for them, to remind them of their worth.